All right. So we began our recording. Folks can keep on pouring in, and the other board members as admins, y'all can keep on admitting people as folks pour in. But without further ado, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Penn Justice Democrats would like to invite everyone to our exciting discussion event tonight. Hi, all. My name is Amira. I'm a founding member of Penn Justice Democrats, as well as our speaker events director. We are Penn's premier populist left political coalition engaged with campaign work to elect progressive down-the-ballot candidates across the nation, as well as coalition work with organizations across campus and Philadelphia to champagne social policies such as Green New Deal, Medicare for All, free public higher education, and others. Penn Justice Democrats is also engaged with hosting discussion events with prominent left scholars and public figures on pressing issues concerning the lives of poor and working people. Recently, we facilitated a discussion with Dr. Noam Chomsky, along with Dr. Cornel West and Dr. Adolph Reed, which Katie attended. Recordings of our previous conversations with these incredible speakers can be viewed on our YouTube channel at Penn Justice Democrats. This particular conversation will also be uploaded on our YouTube channel at Penn Justice Democrats. Tonight, we are beyond grateful and excited to have two very prominent political commentators joining us to discuss the possibilities and challenges of left unity and victory within the neoliberal constraints of the Biden-Harris administration. Joining us tonight is Krystal Ball, an American political pundit and progressive commentator who co-hosts Rising with The Hill's Krystal Ball and Soccer Engine, produced by The Hill. She was previously a contributor under contract for MSNBC and a regular contributor to the Huffington Post. She's now a co-host with Kyle Kulinski, a lot of y'all probably follow, on the progressive podcast, Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. We're also very excited to have Katie Halper join us tonight. Katie is an American filmmaker, writer, podcaster, and political commentator. She's the host of the podcast, The Katie Halper Show, and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast with Matt Taibbi, who you all probably also follow. So before I begin, a lot of us are big fans of you both. Inside, I'm fangirling very hard right now. So I think a lot of people can relate. This is so exciting for all of us. So we're just so grateful to have you. To lay out the agenda for tonight, during the first 45 minutes of tonight's discussion, each Penn PJD member will pose one question, and both of our speakers will have roughly about 7 minutes in total to answer. Krystal and Katie, I will DM you personally if you have 1 or 2 minutes left, so you have 1 or 2 minutes left.
You can go like this or something.
Yeah, you can just
do this.
I don't always check my DMs, Amira.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just touch my nose. I think that's better for me too. And then the last 15 minutes, we're tentatively hoping to open for Q&A. I ask that folks, if you have a question for Katie and Krystal on Zoom, just DM me. My name is Amira Chowdhury. DM me the question and we will try to get to as many as we can in the remaining time. And throughout the event, please feel free to engage in our chat. We want this to be an engaging event. So as our commentators are answering, write your responses however you're feeling. Please engage with us in the chat. Without further ado, Katie and Krystal, we're all so excited to have you. And I would like to begin by posing the first question. And also, I'll just put the question as well at the end in the chat so you can refer to it if need be. So the Biden-Harris administration has ushered in a new Obama 2.0 era of neoliberal politics, characterized by the establishment left caving to the right for the sake of the mythical notion of bipartisanship. And within this political reality, the populist left is struggling to develop a robust and broad political coalition to withstand corporate forces dominating both parties and generate meaningful wins for working people. So our question is working with right-wing populists a legitimate and viable strategy to build the broad working class solidarity needed to transform the material conditions of poor and working people? Or would white supremacy bar effective solidarity between these two populist coalitions?
I can grab that one.
Sorry. What was the last thing
Katie.
you said? I just couldn't hear. Would white supremacy?
Yeah, so would white supremacy effectively bar effective solidarity between the two coalitions? I also posted the question in the chat.
Right, in the chat. Okay, thanks.
So what I would say is, first of all, thank you guys. It's great to be with you guys. I really appreciate it. I always welcome the chance to, to get to talk to real live human beings during these times, even if they are on a screen. So thank you. I think the question that you've posed, Amira, is one of the most important questions, not only of this moment, but really throughout American history. Because when you are a person who believes in the power and possibility of class politics, we've seen how class politics have been broken on the shoals of race and white supremacy time after time after time, era after era. And we've also seen that it's not just, the people who themselves hold either subtle or unsubtle racist views that cause the problems for that solidarity, but there is an active campaign from elites to keep people divided because that serves their interests, right? The scariest thing to corporate power elites here and around the world is the idea of actual multiracial working class solidarity, and they will do everything in their power to keep that from ultimately happening. As to your question of whether or not it is viable to form a coalition with the populist right, here's what I would say. As far as populist right leaders in DC, it's a fantasy. I mean, the guy who's held up as populist right in Washington is Josh Hawley, who, on a few issues is slightly better than your average, Reaganite conservative on economics. Obviously, his views on culture, on Stop the Steal, on any range of issues are completely abhorrent. You might find an opportunity to work with Josh Hawley, as Bernie Sanders did, on stimulus checks. You might find an opportunity to work with Ted Cruz on antitrust. He's actually supportive of the left-wing DOJ potential antitrust nominee from the Biden administration over the centrist one. So you also may find an opportunity to work with libertarians on issues like civil liberties in particular. Rand Paul comes to mind as someone you can work with on ending wars, on curbing domestic surveillance, and those sorts of issues. So on any particular issue, I am 100% of the mind that you should be looking for coalition partners wherever they lie. I am also 100% of the mind that if you're thinking that there's going to be a lasting, durable caucus of populists coming from the right, but also even the populists on the left can be a little bit squishy and not as steadfast as we want them to be sometimes. But in particular on the right, that's a fool's errand. Now, I do think in terms of, I believe a lot more in the possibilities of working with regular people, because this is one of the things that we found on Rising is, look, you guys are all lefties, just like me, just like Katie, and many of you, or at least some of you, like the show. But one of the things that's really been heartening about the show is we genuinely have people from across the ideological spectrum. We have neoliberals who like it, we have libertarians, and we have right-wingers who really like and enjoy the show, because we don't play partisan cheerleading games. We try to be honest, and we talk about corruption in the system and corruption of elites. And that is something that almost everybody can get on board with. So that gives me hope that there is a starting point for good-hearted people who are good actors. You're not going to get the friggin' Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys, and don't bother wasting your time. There are a lot of genuinely good people who hate the system, who hate the corruption in it, who hate neoliberalism, who can be potentially brought along on issues like what you talked about, Amira, on issues of Medicare for all, on issues of economic justice, and yes, on issues of racial justice as well, ultimately, even though sometimes it takes a learning process to get to that place.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think a really important distinction that Krystal made is one between kind of the political elites. So you have those populists, then you have actual people, kind of civilians, right? And the question of working with other people, I think it's kind of become an amorphous question, because what do these coalitions mean? Does this mean reaching out to people to get them to vote for a certain candidate, to organize around a certain issue? I think that a lot of people have it backwards, and they see racism as proof that class consciousness or organizing around class can't work, when to me, that just makes it that much more urgent that we organize around class. Because one of the things, and again, no one is ever saying that, that we're going to get rid of racism through basically anything. But, you know, if you want people to feel part of a group, an identity, to feel like they belong, to feel like they have an interest that's being spoken to, I mean, that is one of the ways that you can appeal to people and pull them away from a more nationalist, racist, jingoist, xenophobic orientation. So I do think that and I think Krystal's right. You know, there's like a Venn diagram. There's some people that are with us already. There's some people we can reach, and then there's some people we'll never get to. And then there's some people who we need to convert, and then other people who we maybe can't convert, but we can show up, you know, to a rally or to get out a vote on something. So I just think it's an important question. I think a lot of people, I don't know what the left-wing equivalent of the word virtue signal is, because I know that's such a Trumpian term. We need a left-wing equivalent of virtue signaling and also of Trump derangement brain syndrome, because those are both real things. But I do think a lot of people take this very kind of like chastising, self-righteous position on this that's ironically, ultimately, I would say, alienating and harms the very people who we want to be champion, working with the most marginalized people. And again, it's a fine line between asking people to work with people who may not believe that they have the right to exist. That's a different thing. But I'll wrap because I saw the finger on the nose thing. I yield my time to the next question.
Wonderful signal. Thank you so much to you both for providing us just an opportunity to really nuance our understanding of the possibilities of cross solidarity between both populist groups and the role of corporations in making sense of this. I will now pass it on to my comrade Marissa to ask the next question.
Thank you both so much for being here with us. I will also put the question in the chat after I ask, but this is our question. Seeing the lengths the Democratic establishment will go to not only prevent left candidates from taking office in local, state, and federal elections, but to hinder their success in implementing left policies once elected, do you believe that electoralism will allow for the structural systemic changes our country needs? As a follow-up, are there realistic alternatives to the watered down reforms offered by neoliberals?
You want to take this one first, Katie?
Yeah. So is electoral politics viable? Is there any hope for that? Is that basically what you're asking?
Yeah.
God, I mean, this is such a hard question. To me, I almost think it's a question of personal preference. I mean, I don't want to sound like a nihilist, and I feel both hopeful and nihilistic at the same time. There's so many things that have to happen at once. There's so many different lanes that people need to be in. There's so many different roles for people to play. Do I think that we had a chance to do something and we blew it, or some other people blew it? Yes, obviously. In case you guys don't know, I was somewhat partial to a certain senator from Vermont. I like Leahy too, but I'm talking about Bernard Sanders. But yeah, I mean, I think that electoral politics won't save us. I think that what we need to do is really that doesn't mean that we don't think strategically about elections, but we really need to make all politicians. I mean, we see this with the squad too, right? Like, it's our job to make politicians afraid of not doing the right thing. Or the left thing in this case, right, as the case may be. But I do think that that's just one piece of it, right? And all of these changes that we've seen, all through history, FDR, LBJ, JFK, to the extent that they did do good things, as we know from history, it wasn't because of their conscience. I mean, it was because it was no longer politically viable for them to keep doing the bad things. And there was a pressure campaign, and there was pain that they would have to face if they didn't. So that's kind of what we have to remember. Now, again, I do think that, like, Sanders is exceptional. I think that some people are exceptional, and I think he does have a moral vision and clarity that a lot of other people don't. At the same time, even with him, and I think he's probably the best it gets, even with him, we need to be pushing him to do the right thing often. And, you need to corner people, basically. So it's working out there beyond electoral politics, also, pushing things into the electoral political realm. It's really both ends, as corny and a cop-out as that may sound, but I do think it's true.
Yeah.
And the labor movement, it would be nice to have a labor movement. Okay.
Yeah. I'll say, to me, that's the essential cornerstone. Like, the theme of the discussion tonight is how to unite the left. And there is no left without a viable labor movement in this country. And today there really isn't a viable labor movement. we've been covering on Rising. We actually had the president of the United Mine Workers of America on the show today. They're in the fourth week of a miners' strike down in Alabama. And it's literally about getting back to the wages they had in 2016. And we, of course, know about, the Amazon union election and the way that the deck is just absurdly stacked against workers. To the question of, so to me, electoral politics is not everything, not even close to everything. But I don't think we can afford to opt out of it. And I would say this, for those of you who are tempted, as I am oftentimes, to sink into nihilism, we came really fucking close with Bernie. I mean, it was right there 2 times in a row. So to look at that when there was really very little left infrastructure to speak of, right? Almost nothing. I mean, Justice Democrats is a brand new baby organization and already having profound impact on American politics. And yeah, I get freaking frustrated with the squad sometimes, and they're not, leveraging the power that they have. But you got Chuck Schumer looking over his shoulder at AOC as a potential primary contender, and any of the even remotely progressive things that he's doing is because of that pressure. So no, we haven't gotten everything we wanted. We're never, that's a long time work in progress. But to just throw up your hands at this point, I don't think it's reflective of the track record. Now, that being said, and one other thing I'll say on that, I do think that primaries are where the real action is at, because at this point in American politics, after the 2020 election, the centrists went out there, the right-wing Democrats went out there and said, oh, it's the left's fault that we underperformed, and it was defund the police, and it was this, and it was that. And I participated in the discussion by saying, hey, look, everybody who supported Medicare for All did really, really well, and it was a bunch of blue dogs who lost. But the truth of that debate is that, unfortunately, it doesn't matter that much what policies a candidate supports at the congressional level, whether they're a good candidate or a bad candidate. It's all pretty much, when you get to the general election, about how that particular district is drawn. So what that means, that's depressing on the one hand. On the other hand, the opportunity is, if you can get a lefty through the primary, then you're probably, if you're in the right district, going to get a lefty in Congress. So to me, the place, and this is what you guys are, this is what Justice Dems was founded on the principle of, and I think it's the right principle. The real action in shifting power in electoral American politics right now is in the primaries.
Thank you both so much for your really thoughtful answers. I will now pass it on to Emily for the next question.
Hello, thank you both for being here. So you both touched a little bit on this topic, but since the theme of the discussion night is uniting the left, we'd love to hear more about it. So coalitions like Justice Democrats and the Democratic Socialists of America have mobilized to elect progressive candidates to change the material conditions of poor and working class people through ushering in a new group of progressive BIPOC congressional members known as the Squad. The Squad campaigned on populist left policy, which has made them competitive in challenging incumbent candidates in their local districts. However, there has recently been mounting public criticism from the left of members of the Squad and their lack of willingness to leverage their political power and put pressure on the issues that they campaigned on. What are your thoughts regarding criticisms of the Squad? Should the left trust them to apply appropriate strategies to achieve the change we all want to see?
I don't think that the left should trust anyone. I mean, I don't mean to be mean by that, but look, when we're talking about the Squad now, these are elected officials with a significant amount of political power. And so I don't think anyone is above a pressure campaign. I don't think anyone is above criticism, especially on the issue of policy and the issue of tactics. Now, where I have been frustrated, in where some of the force the vote discussion, for example, has gone, which is what I think that the question is kind of pertaining to, is this over the top attacking of their motives, or that they've, sold out and they're now corporate, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't see any evidence of that. I mean, these are still people who don't take corporate PAC money. they still very much support the left principles that we all believe in. I think we've had a disagreement over tactics, and that's fine. Look, I think it's frustrating because you see the way that Manchin and Sinema in particular, or Josh Gottheimer on the SALT tax, like they're willing to instantly go to the mat and say, no SALT tax, no dice. I'm walking away from the infrastructure deal. Or on the relief deal, we got to means test the checks or else I'm walking away. We got to lower the corporate tax rate or else I'm walking away. I mean, they just instantly go to the mat and threaten and throw their weight around. And meanwhile, you have the progressives like, we're going to write a letter. We'd really like you to consider. You're not going to do it. It's okay. We're still going to vote for you. You like, there's just such a meekness there. And look, the kind, and I think this is correct, the kind interpretation is that the right wingers don't give a shit about people. And so the idea of blowing up a deal that is really going to help people, that doesn't bother them. That doesn't weigh on their conscience at night. But when you're talking about Bernie and you're talking about AOC and you're talking about Congresswoman Omar and the rest, like they're really weighing these issues of, God, what if the thing goes down and people don't get a check in their bank account? Like they really need that help right now. So their own sort of goodness is leveraged against them. But if you're not going to throw your weight around on something as freaking popular as a $15 minimum wage that passed overwhelmingly in Florida, like when are you going to use the genuine leverage that you have right now? So I guess to sum up, look, to me, everybody should be held to the same standard. No one is above reproach. In fact, I think we have higher expectations for our allies than we do for, I don't have any expectations for the Republicans or for Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or whoever. So holding them to a high standard, no problem with that. Just over the top, bashing them as human beings or their motives, et cetera, without actual proof that there's something nefarious afoot, I draw the line there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between critiquing power and policy and then critiquing kind of someone's, or not even critiquing, slamming someone's character, which I think that I think in many ways it's just very counterproductive because I think it backfires and it makes people kind of develop this bunker mentality where they feel like their person is under attack. And it also makes it easier for that person to dismiss people's criticism as kind of inappropriately hostile. I do think, though, that we do need to be out there and pressuring people. And it's almost like a question of physics, right? Like you can't have this pull to the right that exists and the donor classes. Like if politicians, even if we believe certain squad members are progressive and want to do the right thing, like they need to have the pressure even to show their colleagues that they have no choice. Like there needs to be that leverage, there needs to be that push, because it's not enough to just have the right ideas. Like they need to feel like if they don't do this, there's going to be a price to pay. And they also need to show the world and show their, like Pelosi, like that there's going to be a price to pay. So I do think that, we can't appeal to just people's good hearts. We do have to make it is a question of power.
Yeah.
And that has to be wielded. And, that famous, it's apocryphal probably, but FDR saying to Abe Philip Randolph, who had all these great demands about labor and civil rights, and he's like, okay, great, now go out and make me do it. Like even the politicians who we love the most, who want to do the right thing, need us pushing, or else they can't spend their political capital on it.
If I could just add really quickly on that, Kshama Sawant, socialist city councilwoman in Seattle, and one of the... Is she really? I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah, but she's facing a recall. Everyone go support her. Kshama Sawant, yes.
She's awesome. And she was really one of the first to put $15 minimum wage on the map years ago, and subject of all kinds of scaremongering, and Amazon tried to shut it down and all of this. And even though Seattle, obviously it's a Democratic city, she didn't have support on the city council. And so I asked her, how did you get this? How did this happen? Not how did you get this done, but how did this happen? And she said, yeah, we didn't count on the politicians. We organized, we worked with labor, we got people in the streets, communities came out and forced the politicians to get in the right place on this issue. And I do think that's how we have to think about politics.
Yeah. She's so awesome, by the way, Kshama Sawant. Everyone should go to her Twitter page. It's
fierce.
She's so fierce. I've had her on the show. You've had her on yours. Her Twitter is CMKSHAMA. And I'm just looking at her latest tweet. And again, there's a recall effort against her, so everyone has to go out and support her. But she, the Seattle Truth Out tweeted, the Seattle City Council, led by Kshama Sawant, passed a resolution calling on Joe Biden to immediately end U.S. stonewalling of an international effort to suspend vaccine patents as COVID-19 cases surge worldwide, which is like, she's just amazing. She has a total internationalist view. And yeah, big shout out to her. I think I'm having her on this Thursday, by the way, on the Katie Halper show.
We had her on this Monday.
There you go.
Thank you both.
She's a repeat on my show too.
Thank you both for such a nuanced and insightful response. And also Jacob posted the Twitter link so everyone can go check her out.
Awesome, yeah,
cool.
And I will now pass it on to Jacob.
Yeah, thank you for such an amazing response. And that last bit about Kshama Sawant's Twitter really leads into this next question. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask between Western countries' refusal to loosen intellectual property rights over COVID vaccines and the recent struggle to get America to supply India with raw materials needed to produce the vaccine imperialism has taken the spotlight in the global fight against COVID-19. Considering that Democrats and Republicans are largely united in their support for a real defense budget of over $1 trillion, endless wars, and neo-imperialism, what would it take to make progressive foreign policy a reality?
That's a tough one.
I mean, one thing I will say, and this relates back to the opening question about coalitions, is that I think we really need to get over and that's interesting, I didn't think of this, but there is a question about motives. Motives are both relevant and also can sometimes be irrelevant. And we will have people, both elected officials and also just people out there in the world, who will support something for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. And again, there's this discourse of kind of like disqualifying a position because some people on the right have it. And, that doesn't work when you're talking about foreign policy. Like people, you may have a right-wing populist xenophobe who doesn't want to fight wars abroad because they don't want to spill like American blood over there and don't want to waste money there, and they're isolationists. But that doesn't mean that like they aren't voting the correct way. It also doesn't mean that we can't appeal to people out there and kind of meet them where they're at and then also push them to come further along. Like I would rather someone for the wrong reasons oppose war than someone who, considers themselves progressive but actual hawks. Like that's a dangerous thing. That's really, really dangerous because at least we kind of know where people are on that issue. So I think that we need to be building more solidarity. I mean, here also, but also abroad. And I think that, what's happening in Yemen, for instance, and this is one of those areas where it's really tricky. And I had Shireen Al-Dami on my show this week. It hasn't been released yet, but everyone should follow her too. And, Biden, this is the dangerous part. Like, people kind of checked Yemen off the list. Like, okay, we got rid of Trump, and now we have Biden, and now it's good. We're no longer supporting Saudi Arabia. That's not true at all. We're not supporting them on their offensive campaigns, but they are on their defensive campaigns, as if Saudi Arabia has a defensive campaign against, like, the people of Yemen at all. But we have to be really, really vigilant because one of the things that is scary is that people really think that we're safe now, like we're back to normal. And Biden, even people who are critical think like, well, at least on the international stage. No, not at all. Like there are I think that Trump, because he's a weirdo, like there in some ways he was less hawkish. I mean, he was hawkish also, but Ro Khanna himself, I asked him about whether he was surprised about some of the Dems being hawkish. He's like, no, they've been a hawkish party. I mean, look at Vietnam. So in terms of how to do it, I think we need to kind of like meet people where they're at, push a more internationalist, less jingoist message and framing, but also like make the connections between, why should we be fighting in wars abroad when we have so much to do here, but also not giving into this competitive zero-sum game issue, because that's also dangerous. And we want to have solidarity here and abroad. So.
Jacob, the connective tissue in the two issues that you raise, both the endless wars and also the vaccine imperialism is money. Yeah. I mean, right. That's really the connective tissue there. And so I actually do think that progressives have made some progress in the discourse on foreign policy. You're allowed to dissent on Israel now, and you have a chance of not being canceled at least. There is Ro Khanna, I think, has been extraordinarily brave and consistent on foreign policy and a really fierce voice and totally committed to building coalitions where he can. So I do think that there has been some progress made, not least of which because the American people are still scarred and horrified by the way that they were lied to in the Bush administration into a war that has caused chaos abroad, that has led to, the deaths of many American soldiers, but many more, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and Afghanistan's destabilized an entire region. I just saw a poll, Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan, which, if it happens, I give him lots of credit for, because president after president has promised this and failed to deliver, has something like 78% approval among the American population. Like, these are dramatically popular policies. And yet the reason that they don't happen is money. It's money from defense contractors. It's the idea, and I would add corruption to that list. It's the idea that, Liz Cheney, after she loses her congressional seat, she can go get a board seat at Raytheon. But it's not just Republicans. Plenty of Democrats have that in their mind too, for their post public service career. So I think you're going to struggle against these same forces so long as money is so incredibly central to politics, and so long as politicians are able to cash in on their public service to their own private benefit when they get out of office. I'm a hardliner on this. I don't think that these people should be employed after they leave Congress. I think they should get a pension, and that should be that. They sure as hell shouldn't be trading stocks while they're in office. Outrageous that happens. It's another totally corrupting influence. So that's, to me, the real root of the problem. And listen, the vaccine IP thing, I am so on fire and outraged about right now. And as you put it, it's the Biden administration just continuing the Trump administration's policies, standing in the way of World Trade Organization initiative to try to lift patent protection on this vaccine, which, by the way, the mRNA technology was funded not by Pfizer, not by Moderna. US taxpayers funded the research for mRNA. And now the pharmaceutical companies want to privatize all the profits that were funded by the public. So I am totally outraged about that whole situation. Bill Gates has been a terrible player involved as well, but the root of all of this is money. And that's what we really have to get to if we want to push forward progressive policies in these areas.
Yeah, that is a disgusting thing, by the way, and everyone should be shamed. Like, a shaming campaign. We should have photos of people dying, like here and abroad, show it's not needed. And one of the biggest things I think that Sanders contributed to the left is this idea that, like, we can demand more and it's not delusional, and that there are things we've been told are impossible, and that's not true. They're very possible, and it's always been a choice made by the powerful to do what they're doing or to not do what they're not doing. And I do think COVID, provides some possibility. It's beyond tragic, but there is, I think, maybe a possibility of seeing how how solidarity is actually required, even on the level of self-interest, right? So, like, this is such a great example of, you understand. Can I curse on this? Okay, assholes out there, you understand that when you're denying people in other countries a vaccine or access to the materials to do the vaccine, like, that is, remember, this virus is communicable, right? Like, for the sake of your own ass, don't you want people in other countries? Don't you want to help lower the rates of COVID abroad? It is so short-sighted, and it's like such a pathological, like, short-term capitalist sadistic thing to do. And I don't know, like, I think that we just need to have, we also need to get more creative, I think, in our organizing and activism. I'm not, I think people should have pickets in front of their, protests in front of their homes, whatever. It's harder with the COVID, but we got to be creative, because these people, anyone from Bill Gates to, Biden, I think we should use the Trump argument. Like, look at all the things that he rightly criticized Trump for. Like, what are you doing? You're letting people die. Like you are
you are continuing the Trump policy.
Yeah, you're continuing the Trump policy in many ways. And on this issue, it's just like, no, sorry. You don't get a pass just because you wear a mask and tell people to wear masks and believe in science. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you both so much for a really excellent response. And I'll now pass it on to Jack for the next question.
Hello. So again, you've touched on this a little bit, but this question is a little bit more about the sort of shit show left-wing internet culture that we've seen, especially as of late.
What are you talking about?
Clarify.
So from, commentators like, Sam Cedar and Vosh and Kyle and both of you, we've seen many left-wing commentators who have a very strong internet base, who disagree with one another on a plethora of issues, whether it be, force the vote or supporting Biden's candidacy to begin with, or, working with right-wing populists, as we mentioned earlier. Given this fierce factionalization of the left, which seems to be somewhat rising, especially since Bernie's loss, what are your thoughts on the disagreements waged by left-wing commentators and our listeners? How can the left effectively overcome this internal fierce tension, and how have you guys responded to it personally, given your status as commentators?
Personally, I've checked down a bit. I hate the dynamic that you're talking about, Jack, because it makes the whole thing, it makes all of us look ridiculous. And I'm not just talking about like me and Katie in the commentary. It makes the entire left look childish and unserious. Like we can't even, get to a policy because we're too busy like in these weird high school cliques squabbling with each other. Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
So as much as possible, and I'm sure I've been an offender at times, I don't know, but I really try to check out of that, because what a waste of time. And you're right, Jack, that I think Bernie was a kind of unifying force, right? All the oars were going in the same direction. And after him, there's this kind of like power vacuum, and everybody's trying to fight for, okay, which direction are we going to row the ship in, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing I can say, and this is ironic because Bernie was such, in a way, he was a personality, but it was also so clearly about like what the policies were. To me, that's the answer. And we got to cut each other some freaking slack. Someone can disagree with you and not be a grifter or what. That word is so overused
Grifter
now.
or neoliberal shill. Those are the only two camps.
Someone's allowed to have a difference of opinion with
Right.
you and not be like a dreadful, horrible human being. It's okay.
Yeah.
So to me, forget about the personalities, which I know is really rich to say since I'm one of those personalities. Right. Forget about the personalities, focus on the policy, have genuine, like good faith debates about the tactics and how we get there. It's okay to have those disputes, but just freaking cut it out with the high school squabbling, endless back and forth. My God, are we going to fight over force the vote for the next decade? Okay, they didn't do it. We can learn from that. We can move forward. But I think the whole squabbling back and forth just makes all of us associated with the left look silly.
And also it makes us look really out of touch and kind of like self-indulgent and looks like a vanity project. And there is like, look, the truth is, like, in these times of pandemic, our realities have been shaped and our interactions have been limited, and there's a lot of living online. And something I struggle with is how to make sure that like my shows are entertaining and funny and informative, but also like I want to do more to link what our commentary to actual causes. And like Krystal, you just brought up the United Mine Workers guest that you had. I'm like, oh yeah. I have to talk about that issue. Like every show, maybe I need to have also like a donation link or something to a certain cause or organization. And mutual aid is really important now, but I do think that that's important. And yeah, we have to be able to, I really do think like having debates that are less personalized is really important. And then there's always a question of like, well, where's the line? And I'm not sure where the line is for many things, but I definitely agree that in general, it should be less about that and more about the issues. And, we do have a lot of stuff in common. And I think it's hard when we're online and we're all watching stuff online, and then things like get us frustrated and make us angry. Maybe we like
Mm-hmm.
them, but we do have to be more disciplined. Because if not, we're obviously just going to eat each other, but also not even be paying attention to the real issues out there.
Yeah, if not, we are just a bunch of grifters. Because
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth of what's going on is you put someone who's got a big following's name in the headline, and that generates clicks. I mean, that's a lot of what's going on is political traffic is like way down after the election. And so, you know, YouTubers who this is their business, they know if they put this person's name or that person's name in the headline, that'll help generate traffic. And that's part of what feeds this cycle.
Yeah, I should go right. I should become a right winger. That'll get me into a new audience, new clicking,
Yeah.
new money. That's what I should do. Yeah.
If you were a real grifter, you would do the like, you know, why I left the left. That path is always
Yeah.
open for you, Katie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, thanks so much. I love that response.
Don't clip that, by the way, assholes out there. You're gonna clip that. I know. Why am I saying asshole so much? Sorry, I'm really tired. I'm just letting it all hang out.
No,
Which is good to do on a public Zoom, obviously.
Yeah, that's really the space for it.
All right. I'll now thank you so much for your responses. I'll now pass it to Amira for a Q&A.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for the engaging conversation. So, wow, I'm surprised we are at 4:47, so just 2 minutes ahead, which is great. I have had incredible questions sent to me. So instead of me reading those out, I think the folks would really like to ask them yourselves, given most of us are huge fans. So I'm gonna start first, ask Macy if you would like to unmute and then ask your question to Katie and Krystal.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to thank you guys for being here again. You both were a really important part of like my political development, and yeah, and also Katie, you're probably going to be clipped as the next Dave Rubin.
That's right.
Thank you. A golden dream.
Yeah.
Exposed. Katie Halper exposed.
So my question is, I guess within an incumbent president that hopefully is not likely to run for re-election, and I guess all but certain elevation of Kamala Harris to a front runner candidate, I guess in a hypothetical 2024 primary, how do you think progressives need to respond? Is there really a progressive candidate that would be capable and willing to step up and lead? I guess like Bernie was able to do the last two cycles. And at this point, no one seems willing to substantially challenge the Biden administration, at least progressives in Congress. And is aggressive progressivism something that will only come around during a Democratic primary every 4 years?
Great questions. So first of all, let me say, I think if Joe Biden is at all in shape to run again, they will run him again. That is my full expectation, because they really believe in this guy's electability. He's got decent approval ratings. You know, they're racist and they think people won't really vote for a Black woman. They're afraid of that. So I do think that there is a decent chance that Joe Biden will run again. But there's also a decent chance he won't be in shape to run again in 4 years, in which case I would say, and maybe this isn't very hopeful, but do I think that there's a good chance that a left-wing candidate could beat Kamala Harris? No. Do I think that we need to all coalesce behind one candidate, if for no other reason, to force Kamala Harris to the left on certain key issues? Absolutely. You know, two people, just to throw some names out there that come to mind for me. Number one, Nina Turner, who looks in pretty strong position and who I adore. And who I think we're talking about unity on the left. Like, I think she is one of the few people on the left that everyone in the Bernie left really loves, right? So Nina, or the other person who I think is really interesting is Keith Ellison, who of course is, you know, Attorney General in Minnesota, who was early Bernie supporter when, you know, it was really risky for a member of Congress. He was a phenomenal member of Congress. Extraordinary trailblazer, first African-American elected statewide in Minnesota, did a really phenomenal job with what was obviously an extraordinarily important case in the Chauvin trial. And so he's someone who, you know, up until pretty recently was kind of discarded by the mainstream as like, oh, he's one of those Bernie people, so he must be no good. Well, now he's got credibility, mainstream credibility, because his handling of the Chauvin trials. So he's another one that I would sort of keep on your radar, so to speak. But I do think even if it's a hopeless run, you know, sometimes like Bernie's run in 2016, he thought that was going to be hopeless, and it really turned into something significant that had a shot at actually winning. I think we have to take another run at it. Like I said, if for no other reason to force Kamala Harris left.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Also, shout out to Keith Ellison for predicting that Trump would win the primary, and literally having George Stephanopoulos and Maggie Haberman literally laughing in his face on television. Also, shout out, because you know you're good when Obama like leaves his mansion in Martha's Vineyard to try to, you know, sabotage your campaign. Oh no, I guess this was when Obama was still president? No, when did
that was when he was out. That was like his first foray back into politics was to destroy Keith Ellison's DNC chair campaign.
So shout out, so Obama destroyed the things he's left his mansion for, just to destroy Ellison, to destroy Sanders, to get the NBA to not go on strike. Anything else? I think there are a couple more outrageously shameful, despicable things that he's done.
To hang out with Richard Branson, obviously.
Yeah, that's the other one. Windsurfing, or whatever verb is appropriate. I talked about that once, and I think I said couch surfing by accident, but it's the opposite of couch surfing. But yeah, I agree. I mean, if for nothing else, to move the conversation to the left, I think something that's interesting about Kamala is that she's just a kind of shell of a person. I think she has absolutely no ideology, which is kind of scary in terms of like what she's like as a person. Although, let's be honest, like most politicians are sociopaths anyway. But I think Biden, they're both like pragmatic, but Biden has some ideology in some areas. Oh, he's such a liar, who even knows? But I do think that she'll respond to political pressure. But then the question is, like, there's also the financial pressure from the donors. So we do just have to make sure to do everything we can to either, you know, defeat the next person or move them left.
Wonderful. Just because we have 8 more minutes sort of left, I want to ask if Jay, if you would want to unmute your mic and ask a question, and maybe we can keep this answer to like 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow, way to silence women.
Hopefully this will lift y'all up a little bit. So first of all, thanks so much for being here. I'm like a little starstruck to like think about like my daily morning routine on video here every day. So Krystal and Katie, you both have built such a strong media audience on the left, and that's kind of what I want to ask about. The documentary that really fired me up and inspired me over the past year was called Bernie Blackout. And Krystal, I remember you talked about your time on MSNBC and about how your producer or you would literally get called by executives and told like, don't cover that, or you have to talk about this, and how much of the media establishment, not just structurally, but like directly, intentionally pushed forward a certain narrative in the primary. And I'm wondering, how do we on the left create our own independent media conglomerate that can actually compete with the mainstream media and get, you know, progressive adjacent folks to start understanding our narrative and not believe in some of the pernicious myths that were put out about Bernie and other candidates? How do we build that?
Well, that's part of the project of Rising. First of all, you're right about my experience at MSNBC. Usually the pressure was a lot more subtle. Usually it's a lot more, you know, the Chomsky, what he lays out in Manufacturing Consent. It's about the people you hire, about what's rewarded. It's like this subtle system where you know what you're supposed to say and do. But in occasional instances, they do come in and say, hey, we got a call from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And if you're going to talk about her again, your monologue has to be vetted by the president of the network, which is something that literally happened to me. Or, you know, nobody really cares about trade or TPP, so we're not going to cover it. It doesn't rate. Like, those very direct interventions do ultimately happen. But, you know, I think we have actually built a very strong independent ecosystem that continues to grow, and that is really encouraging. The problem that we have, which was really laid bare during the Democratic primary, is that a lot of base Democrats really freaking love mainstream media. I mean, they take it like it's gospel. They will vote for whoever they're told to vote for. And it is really, so it's really hard to penetrate that. Now, one thing that I'm watching with some hope about is I think those circumstances with Trump on the ballot may have been a little bit unique. People were so terrified about another term of Trump that they were like, we'll vote for anybody who's not him. Like, just tell us who can win and we'll vote for that person. And even though they're going to try to recreate those dynamics again, I'm just not really sure that that's ultimately going to work. So I actually think the project of building the progressive media ecosystem is in progress. I think, in addition to the scrappy independent creators we have, I think we need to have some more professional look and feel as well. And sorry, this is longer than you told me to be, Amira. But one thing that we hear about Rising a lot, which I really was sort of accidental, it wasn't part of the plan, but is that because it has that, when you look at it, it has that mainstream or cable news feel. And, I'm in my dress and Sagar's in his suit and we're like presenting like news anchors, but then just talking differently. It kind of slips through the barriers of some more normie Democrats where people can share it with their mom, their dad, their sister, their brother that have sort of more mainstream tastes. And they're willing to tolerate it because it reads as like normal mainstream news. So I think building some more of that into the ecosystem will be helpful as well. And trying to maintain connectivity into elite media spaces, even though that can be extraordinarily frustrating.
Thank you both so much. I think we will probably have time for one more question. Before we do, Jack is going to put in our chat our listserv where folks can put in your email so you can get emails from us regarding future events as well as our social media information. So please follow us and keep updated with all our critical and important events. I would now like to call Noah. I do not want to butcher your last name. I probably will. Noah Redlick.
It's Redlick. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Krystal and Katie for being here. Really huge fans of both of yours. The question I wanted to ask is, when dealing with more centrist type Democrats, how do progressives balance pragmatism with our values? And an example I'm thinking of is, someone like Tim Ryan. I'm not the biggest fan of Tim Ryan. I hated how he went after Bernie in the primaries. I hate that he's not a Medicare for all guy. At the same time, though, Tim Ryan is someone who puts unions front and center, who's gone all in on the PRO Act, which is something I care a lot about. He's gone all in on, $50 minimum wage. So is someone like Tim Ryan someone that progressives should get behind, knowing that, he's a way better 50th vote than Joe Manchin? And, at least we'd have someone who can build that working class coalition and focus on issues like the PRO Act.
Katie, you got thoughts there?
Well, so whether we should get behind him, I guess what does that mean concretely? I'm not being like, I don't mean to sound, yeah.
I mean, what I think you're talking about, like, progressives have a limited amount of resources, is his Senate race, because he's basically the only one running he'll be the Democratic nominee. Is he someone we should get behind? I would argue he's not a good use of resources. Number one, I know him a little bit personally, and I think he is a weasel and a snake.
He looks like a weasel, actually.
Yeah. So number one, but number two, I don't think he's going to win. I think Ohio this is a state that I used to win in. I think Democrats have, Sherrod Brown aside, I think it's very hard to win in the state. I think this year is probably going to be really tough for Democrats in the midterms. So I'm not sure he's a good use of resources to start with. And then I also don't think he's going to be a reliable ally in any way. So I would counsel, the Justice Dems model of focusing on places where you've got a primary choice between a right-wing Democrat and a lefty who's going to actually be there on the principles, and trying to get the lefty through the primary in places where you really got a shot at winning. I just think Ohio is going to be brutal.
Thanks so much.
Of course.
I defer to Krystal on that.
Well,
because I don't know the guy, but I do know I don't like that he said let's stop yelling or something. Wasn't that a bumper sticker he did?
Yeah, that was and then he got like all this praise for this like yelly speech that he did on the floor. Remember that? Right. But the other thing, taking my personal feelings about Tim Ryan off the table, the congressional district in the country that has moved right at the fastest pace is actually the district I used to live in the state of Ohio. So it's trending more rapidly against Democrats exactly because they've abandoned the populist working class principles that could, succeed in a state like Ohio, but that state is running away from Democrats right now.
Well, we are now at time. I'm amazed we finished at 5. So we want to first thank our both two incredible speakers for joining us today. As you both could tell from the tone of a lot of us, for a lot of us, we start the day with your show. And so a lot of fangirling happening behind. And I'm glad that you both got a chance to see the faces behind, your show and the people you're reaching. Some of us young people, you encourage us and you inspire us to continue our activism and have hope in a system that could feel very hopeless at times. So thank you both for joining us.
One last thing I want to say, because Noah mentioned the PRO Act, if I had to say one issue that the left should 100% unite around, even more than minimum wage, because they can leave that stagnant in place forever, that would actually shift the ground and the possibility for working class people and left organizing, it is the PRO Act. So any organizing you can do, any calling of members, it's an uphill slog. I don't see the Biden administration really fighting for it. This is one where we absolutely have to make them do it. And if they pass the PRO Act, I will be the biggest Biden stan of all time.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for joining us. Thank you to our audience members for connecting with, for joining in and engaging. We have our social media information. Please do follow us, and we will put the recording of this session on our YouTube channel for you all to watch. But yeah, so thank you all again, and hope you all have a wonderful day.
Great to meet you guys.
Yeah,
Thank
you too.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.